The lesson that changed everything. The classroom hummed with anticipation. Rows of young Selfar students, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming under the dim blue light of the lecture hall, sat in eager silence. Their multifaceted eyes shimmered with curiosity as they focused on the figure standing at the front. Instructor Relvern, a grizzled veteran of the galactic wars, loomed over them. His mandibles clicked in mild irritation. He had given countless lectures on military history, yet no topic ever ignited such unbridled enthusiasm as the humans. "Ah, so you want to know about the war with Earth," Relvern said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. His antennae twitched as the students chattered excitedly, clicking their mandibles in hushed tones. A young Selfar in the front row, Zurek, raised a claw, his voice filled with excitement. "Instructor, the records state that Earth's military forces were vastly outnumbered, yet they fought on. How is it possible that they survived, let alone won against the coalition?" Relvern let out a long exhale, his posture shifting. He had lived through the horror himself. The battlefield still haunted him. The roar of human war cries, the unrelenting thunder of their projectile weapons, and the sheer willpower that defied all logic. "Sit still, young ones," he said, his mandibles twitching. "Listen closely. What I tell you today is not found in your pristine, sanitized textbooks. What I tell you is truth." The room fell silent as the veteran prepared to share the untold story of Earth's war for survival. First contact was a warning. Relvern straightened his posture, recalling the moment his fleet arrived at Mithra 7, a planet considered to be strategically insignificant yet rich in resources. It had been under the control of a minor alien race called the Trizari, a peaceful, agrarian species. The Selfar Empire, in its ever-expanding conquest, had swept through the system and claimed it with ease. No resistance, no challenge, no war. Then the humans arrived. A single vessel entered Mithra 7's orbit, Relvern recounted. A lone Terran warship, insignia of the United Earth Defense Fleet gleaming against the void. It was outnumbered 100 to 1, yet they did not flee. The students hissed in surprise. What species would stand its ground against impossible odds? A transmission was sent. A simple message. "You have one opportunity to withdraw. Leave Mithra 7 or suffer the consequences." Relvern's eyes darkened as he remembered the laughter that filled the Selfar command deck. Humans were primitives, their technology vastly inferior. What threat could they possibly pose? The Selfar High Commander, General Xortel, gave the order to obliterate the lone Terran ship. It was a mistake. They came like ghosts. "The humans did not fight like us," Relvern admitted. "They did not charge in waves like the brute forces of the Turkan Empire. They did not rely on shield technology like the sophisticated Sereth Dominion. No, they fought with something far worse. Cunning, deception, psychological warfare." The night before the Selfar planned their final bombardment of Mithra 7, human special forces infiltrated the main command post. They hacked communication networks, disabling long-range sensors before systematically eliminating the command officers. "It was as if shadows came alive," Relvern muttered. "One by one, our leaders vanished, replaced only by the chilling silence of the void. Entire battalions were cut off from orders. Ships went dark as power grids failed. Ground forces were left in confusion, unable to coordinate. Then, the real attack began. Not from above. Not from orbit," Relvern said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The humans fought from below." The students leaned forward, captivated. They burrowed beneath the surface. Tunnels, underground assault points. Our forces were overwhelmed before we could even see them. "They were just a few thousand soldiers against millions," Zurek blurted, disbelief evident in his voice. How could they win? Relvern's mandibles twitched. The answer was simple. They fought like they had nothing left to lose. The price of underestimation. "The battle lasted 5 days, Relvern continued. 5 days of relentless human ambushes. Every building turned into a fortress, every corridor a kill zone. Their soldiers were not genetically superior, nor were they cybernetically enhanced. They were just men and women, yet they fought harder than any species I had ever encountered. He turned to face the class, his multifaceted eyes scanning each young face. They did not fight to conquer. They fought to survive. The students remained silent. Even Zyrek, who had been bursting with energy moments ago, was transfixed by the weight of the story. And when we finally sounded the retreat, Ralvern whispered, "The humans did not pursue us. They did not destroy our fleet, though they could have. Instead, they did something that haunts me to this day." "What?" a student asked, voice barely above a whisper. Ralvern let the silence stretch before answering. "They let us go." The room was deathly still. "They gave us mercy," Ralvern muttered, his mandibles clicking softly. "And that, young ones, is why we fear them. Not because of their weapons, not because of their tactics, but because they chose not to annihilate us when we had given them every reason to." A low murmur rippled through the class. Mercy. From a species that had been on the brink of destruction. Ralvern turned toward the doorway. "I have someone you need to meet," he announced. The students watched as the door slid open with a hiss. A massive figure stepped inside, towering over them all. 2 legs, 2 arms, a human. His uniform was pristine, his boots polished, but it was his eyes that held the most weight, calm, calculating, and filled with something no other species had ever possessed. Determination. "This," Ralvern said, "is Captain Elias Vaughn, United Earth Marine Corps. He was there that day, and he will tell you what your textbooks never will." The human took a step forward, his voice steady and firm. "Let's talk about that war, shall we?" The students erupted into an excited frenzy. The lesson was far from over. The art of war. The room was filled with an electrified silence. Every Xelfar student sat frozen in awe, their chitinous limbs tense with anticipation. Even their secondary eyelids, typically used for filtering light, remained wide open, a biological sign of rapt attention. The human, Captain Elias Vaughn, stood tall at the front of the classroom, his uniform a crisp contrast to the dim glow of the lecture hall. His steely gray eyes swept over the students, and he offered a slight, knowing smile. "Your instructor," Vaughn began, his voice smooth and confident, "has told you about our first battle, about how we fought on Mithra 7, about how we refused to break even when the odds were impossible." He stepped forward, his boots thudding heavily against the floor. Even that simple sound, so deliberate, so grounded, made the young Xelfar students tense. Humans moved differently than any other species. They were precise, measured, and above all, intentional. "But you don't truly understand how we fight," Vaughn continued. "You see, most species in the galaxy believe war is about numbers, about firepower, about superiority. But humans..." He paused, letting the silence stretch, then leaned forward slightly. "We fight to win. The first strike." Vaughn crossed his arms and glanced at instructor Ralvern, the Xelfar veteran who had once fought against humanity and survived. The old warrior gave a slow, knowing nod. "You all assume we won because we were lucky," Vaughn said, eyes locked onto the brightest young minds of the Xelfar race. "Because we had some hidden advantage. But that's not the truth. The truth is that we won because we understood something your commanders didn't." He turned toward the holographic display at the front of the room. With a simple tap on his wrist-mounted interface, a 3D rendering of the battle over Mithra 7 appeared, the glowing blue and red indicators showing Xelfar fleets overwhelming a lone Earth warship. "You outnumbered us 100 to 1, Vaughn said, gesturing to the display. "You had advanced shielding, superior energy weapons, and planetary dominance. By every metric, you should have won." He tapped again. The projection zoomed in to reveal a dozen tiny human strike teams infiltrating Xelfar installations across the planet. "But we don't fight wars the way you do," Vaughn continued. We don't send massive armies to die on open battlefields. We cut off your lifelines. We turn your strengths into weaknesses. We make you fear the dark. A war in the shadows. The XFY students twitched in nervous excitement as Vaughn continued. You thought we'd attack from orbit, he said. That we'd fight you in the skies. He shook his head. No, we fought you in the shadows. With another tap on his device, the holographic display shifted. It showed small human squads, barely visible in the dim blue lighting, moving through underground tunnels beneath the XFY bases. We don't just shoot from a distance and hope for the best, Vaughn said. We get up close. We infiltrate. We sabotage. One of the students, Zurek, raised his claw hesitantly. But how did you breach our defensive perimeters? We had sensor drones, motion detectors, anti-infantry turrets. Vaughn chuckled. We used something far more dangerous than any weapon. Zurek's mandibles twitched. What? Vaughn's grin sharpened. Your own arrogance. The student stiffened, caught off guard. Vaughn folded his arms. Your commanders didn't believe we'd fight at all. They expected us to beg for mercy or surrender. They assumed that because we were primitive, we wouldn't dare attack first. He smirked. They were wrong. The holographic display zoomed in again, showing human operatives hacking into XFY communication networks. With one keystroke, entire regiments were cut off from orders. Their commanders vanished in the night. Their installations imploded from within. The students leaned forward, stunned. You believed war was about firepower, Vaughn said. We knew it was about control. Unstoppable, not unkillable. Relvern, standing silently beside Vaughn, finally spoke. But there was something else. Something we feared even more than your tactics. The students turned toward their instructor. It wasn't just their stealth, Relvern murmured, his voice heavy with reverence. It was their refusal to break. Vaughn nodded. Every species in the galaxy has a breaking point, a moment where their warriors see defeat as inevitable and choose to flee. Humans. His gray eyes hardened. We don't have that. The students sat motionless. We had soldiers, Relvern admitted, that struck your Marines with lethal plasma shots, watching as they fell to the ground, wounded. But instead of staying down, he shook his head, mandibles clicking. They got back up. A hush fell over the room. I watched humans fight with broken limbs, Relvern continued. I watched them charge into battle, even when they were bleeding out. I saw one tear off part of his own uniform to stop his friend from bleeding before grabbing his weapon and running straight into the fire. The students exchanged glances, whispers of disbelief spreading among them. That is why we lost, Relvern admitted, his tone low and solemn. Because your kind does not accept defeat. Vaughn let the silence hang for a moment before he spoke again. There's something you need to understand, he said. We don't want war. We don't seek conquest. But when we are pushed into a fight, we do whatever it takes to win. His eyes scanned the young XFY students. You want to know why your empire feared us? He asked. Why, even now, some of your greatest strategists still study how humans fight. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. Because we don't fight for power. We fight for each other. A new kind of warrior. The students remained silent, absorbing everything. For the first time, they saw humanity not as monsters, but as something else. Something far more dangerous. Zurek, still in awe, hesitated before speaking. Captain Vaughn, did your people ever forgive us? Vaughn's gaze softened, and he gave a small nod. We didn't need to, he said simply, because we understood something your leaders didn't. Zurek tilted his head. What? Vaughn smiled. War isn't about hate. It's about survival. And we don't hold grudges against those who simply wanted to survive too. Relvern exhaled deeply. This, he said, gesturing to Vaughn, is why we now fight alongside humans, not against them. The students sat in stunned silence. Their entire understanding of war had changed in a single lesson. And the story was far from over. The day we became allies. The classroom still buzzed with the weight of revelation. Every Self-R student sat motionless, absorbing the uncomfortable truth that humans did not win because of sheer power, nor because of superior technology, but because of something far more unsettling: their unyielding determination. Captain Elias Vaughn stood before them, his gaze calm but unwavering, hands clasped behind his back. Instructor Relvern remained silent, his mandibles clicking softly, a sign of deep contemplation among his species. Zurich, the young Self-R student whose curiosity had been the spark for this discussion, slowly lifted his claw. "Captain Vaughn," he asked cautiously, his voice quieter than before, "if humans fight so fiercely, if you refuse to surrender, then why did your people choose peace after the war?" The human smiled. It was not a condescending smile, nor a victorious one. It was the smile of a man who had seen too much war. "Because," Vaughn said simply, "we know that true victory isn't found on the battlefield. It's found in what comes after." He glanced at Relvern, who gave a slow, knowing nod. The old Self-R veteran turned to his students and let out a deep exhale. "It is time you learned about the day we stopped being enemies," Relvern murmured. "The day we became allies." The class fell into a hushed silence. The war after the war. "It didn't end on Mithra 7, Vaughn said, pacing slightly. "The battle was over, yes. But war doesn't end just because one side stops firing." The students exchanged confused glances. "You see," Vaughn continued, "after your forces retreated from Mithra 7, the human fleet didn't pursue you. We didn't invade your homeworld or demand reparations. Instead, we did something no one expected." He stopped walking and turned toward the class. "We helped rebuild." The young Self-R hissed in disbelief. "Impossible," one student blurted. "No species rebuilds what they destroy." Vaughn smirked. "No other species, maybe. But humans." He let out a breath. "We don't just fight wars. We fix what they break." Relvern stepped forward. "At first, we thought it was a trick," he admitted. "We believed the humans were preparing for another attack, using deception to gain our trust before wiping us out completely." His mandibles twitched. "But then, we saw the truth." The holographic display flickered to life once more, showing humans and Self-R working side by side, repairing infrastructure, distributing food, restoring power grids. "We didn't ask for help," Relvern murmured. "And yet, it was given freely. The price of survival." Vaughn crossed his arms. "Surviving a war isn't the hardest part," he said. "The hardest part is living with what you did to survive." The students remained silent. "We could have left your people broken," Vaughn continued. "We could have let your economy collapse, let your people starve, let your enemies pick apart what was left. But we didn't," Relvern interjected. His multifaceted eyes gleamed with something akin to respect. "And do you know why?" Zurich hesitated before responding. Because you didn't see us as enemies anymore." Vaughn nodded. "Because we knew what it felt like." The classroom fell into another heavy silence. "You all see humanity as an anomaly," Vaughn continued, his voice softer now. "A species that fights harder than any other. A species that refuses to surrender. A species that never stops moving forward." He exhaled. "But what you don't see is the cost of that fight." Relvern turned toward his students, his tone more solemn than before. "Humans do not win without sacrifice," he said. "For every battle they endure, they pay the price in blood, in loss, in grief." "They lost cities," Vaughn added. "They lost entire generations of warriors. And yet, instead of growing bitter, instead of seeking revenge, they sought to heal the wounds they had inflicted." Zurich's mandibles twitched. "But why? If your people were so strong, why didn't you take everything from us?" Vaughn smiled. "Because power means nothing if you have to burn the universe down to hold on to it." The moment of change. Relvern turned to Vaughn. Tell them about Cayenne 4, he said. Vaughn's face darkened slightly. He inhaled sharply before continuing. Cayenne 4 was a Xelfar outpost, a place meant to house your empire's last line of war refugees. It was supposed to be a safe haven after the war ended. He turned toward the students. And then the Bristec Empire came. The young Xelfar stiffened. Even speaking the name Bristec sent a chill through their spines. They saw your species as weak, Vaughn said. They saw you as defeated, and they decided to finish what we refused to. Ralvern's voice was a low growl. They attacked with no warning. They burned our cities, took our children, wiped out entire colonies. The students were utterly still. And what did the humans do? Vaughn asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Zerek's throat clicked. You came back. Vaughn nodded. We did. The battle that forged a brotherhood. The holographic display changed again. This time, it showed something that no Xelfar had ever truly understood. Human warships, hundreds of them, jumping into Xelfar space, not as invaders, as allies. When the Bristec attacked your people, we had a choice, Vaughn said. We could have stayed out of it, could have let you burn. He exhaled sharply. But we remembered Mithra 7. We remembered the ones who surrendered instead of dying for nothing. And we remembered the ones who, even in their darkest moment, had the courage to ask for help. Vaughn turned to Ralvern. And this time, we weren't going to let you stand alone. The students sat frozen as the holographic display played out the Battle of Cayenne 4. Human marines fighting alongside Xelfar warriors, ships covering each other's retreat, humans dying for Xelfar civilians. For the first time in history, two former enemies had become brothers in arms. And they had never fought alone since. A new legacy. Zerek swallowed hard, his secondary eyelids flickering. So, that's why our people are allies today. Ralver nodded. It is why I stand here today, teaching you this lesson, rather than preparing for another war. Vaughn's gaze softened. We are not your enemies anymore, he said. We are something far greater. He took a step forward, his gray eyes gleaming. We are your friends. The unbreakable bond. The room remained silent, but not out of fear. The Xelfar students were thinking, a rare, profound kind of thinking that rewrote everything they had once believed about humans, war, and survival. They had always been taught that the war with Earth had ended in a ceasefire, a political maneuver, not an act of mercy, and certainly not an act of friendship. Yet here stood Captain Elias Vaughn, a human who had fought their kind, now standing before them, not as a conqueror, not as a relic of war, but as a symbol of something far greater. The young Xelfar student, Zerek, felt his claws tremble slightly as he processed it all. This lesson was supposed to be about history, but it wasn't. It was about the future. And so, he raised his claw once more. Captain Vaughn, Zerek asked, his voice quieter than before, if we were once enemies, if our war was so brutal, why do humans trust us now? Vaughn's expression softened, his gaze filled with something that Zerek couldn't quite name. Because trust isn't given, the human said, voice steady. It's earned. A test of honor. Trust isn't built in peace, Vaughn continued. It's built when everything is falling apart, when you have every reason to walk away, but still choose to stand beside each other. Ralvern let out a low breath, stepping forward. That test came not long after the war ended. He murmured, his tone heavy with memory. And it wasn't a test humans gave to us. It was a test we gave to them. The students turned their attention to the Xelfar veteran, whose multifaceted eyes gleamed in the dim light. We were broken, Ralvern admitted. Our economy collapsed, our empire fractured, and our people were afraid. Afraid of ourselves, afraid of the Bristec, afraid the humans would finish what they started if we showed weakness. But then, Vaughn interjected, your leaders made a choice that changed everything. The holographic display flickered to life once more, revealing a desolate world, its atmosphere filled with storm clouds and rivers of dust. "This," Vaughn said, "is Veltrathis, a Selfar mining colony on the edge of known space." Zyrek's eyes widened. But that colony was destroyed decades ago." Vaughn nodded. "Yes, by someone you trusted." The students shifted uneasily, their exoskeletons clicking together in nervous movement. Relvern spoke next, his tone grim. "After the war, we attempted to rebuild our alliances. One of those alliances was with the Tarkali Trade Guild, a neutral faction that had supplied us with resources for centuries." He exhaled. "But what we didn't realize was that the Tarkali never forgave us for losing the war." The hologram shifted, displaying Tarkali warships descending upon Veltrathis, weapons armed, bombarding the surface without warning. "They betrayed us," Relvern growled. "They wiped out our outpost, slaughtered our miners, and left the survivors to die in the wreckage." Zyrek and the other students stiffened. But the humans." Vaughn nodded. "We got the distress signal, and we had a choice to make. Would we let them die?" At the time, Vaughn said, our people were still debating what kind of relationship we should have with the Selfar. Some wanted to turn away, believing that our past war was too recent, that your people weren't ready for our help. He exhaled. But then, one voice changed everything. The hologram zoomed in, revealing the figure of an elderly human woman standing in a grand hall filled with political leaders, all arguing over the fate of the Selfar survivors. Her name was Ambassador Lillian Carter, Vaughn said, his voice filled with respect. She stood before our Senate and gave a speech that changed everything. Relvern's mandibles clicked in agreement. "I know the speech well," he murmured. Zyrek leaned forward, transfixed. "What did she say?" Vaughn's voice grew stronger, as if he had memorized every word. "We were once their enemies," he quoted, his tone carrying the weight of history. "But today, they are the ones in need, and we are the only ones who can save them." The room remained silent as Vaughn continued. "So I ask you, not as a politician, not as a diplomat, but as a human, do we let them die simply because they were once our enemies?" He looked each student in the eye. "Or do we show them what it truly means to be human? The rescue that made history." The hologram shifted once again, displaying hundreds of human warships breaking into Tarkali-controlled space, ignoring political consequences, moving toward Veltrathis with one mission in mind: to save the Selfar. Relvern's voice was quieter now. "We thought they wouldn't come," he admitted. "We thought we would be left to die." He looked at Vaughn. "But they came." "They did more than that," Vaughn said. "They fought for you. They broke the Tarkali blockade, landed on the surface, pulled your wounded from the ruins, and airlifted thousands of survivors." Zyrek's throat clicked in astonishment. "You risked war to save us." Vaughn gave a slow nod. "Yes." And Relvern added, "They never asked for anything in return." The students sat in stunned silence. "You see," Vaughn said, his tone softer now, "trust is not built in words. It's built in actions. And that day, we didn't just save your people." He let the moment linger before finishing. "We became your brothers and sisters in arms. A future without war." Relvern turned toward his students, his gaze firm. "This is why we stand with humanity now," he said. "Not because of diplomacy, not because of treaties, but because of what we have seen with our own eyes." Vaughn nodded. "We will never be the same species," he admitted. "We are different in every way. But when the moment came, when the universe tested us, we chose each other." He stepped forward, looking at Zyrek and the other students with a gaze filled with conviction. "And if the day ever comes when humans are the ones calling for help," Vaughn said, "I hope that you'll be the ones answering." The young Selfar stared at him, processing what it all meant. For centuries, their kind had feared humans, feared their ruthlessness, their unyielding nature, their tenacity in battle. But now, Zyrek no longer saw humans as something to fear. He saw them as allies, and perhaps something more. Family.